Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the DM's Book Club, your favorite place for ramblings about, in this case, small people that like to hide away from society in clutches and communes that are definitely not cults. I'm here with my friend that definitely doesn't belong in a cult either. I mean that sincerely. It's Fee. How are you?
The greater good. Yes, I'm fine, thank you. I'm very well.
Good.
I'm not part of a cult.
No, exactly. You're not. But just by saying that, people raise their eyebrows.
Yes,
it is. Well, I can't remember what there's a term for it when there's just mere suggestion that something isn't a thing makes people think that it is.
Yeah,
it's like an insinuation of some kind. But
well, I think you and I both had it when we messaged each other, going, "Hey, I need to talk to you. Don't worry, it's nothing bad." And instantly you go, "Well, it must be terrible. I don't know what it is. It must be bad." But
I did this for years, genuinely thinking I was helping. Like I would message people and I'd be, "Don't worry about this. I've got something to tell you," but it's a really minor thing because I genuinely thought, right, well, Ryan's setting the scene. They see that sentence, they don't worry about things. And years later, my wife actually sat me down and was like, when you do that, you might as well just say the thing and then say, but it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Because by saying it's not a big deal, but you go, okay, right, this is the biggest deal Ryan's ever had, and he hates it.
It's so weird because obviously, like you said, you think you're diffusing a situation, but I guess because like I've had it where people go, "Oh, I'll see you later. I've got something to tell you, but don't worry about it." And then they go, "That thing I have to worry about, and it's definitely about me." And I've been in pubs. Our friend David did it to me once, where he was like, "I've got something to tell you, but don't worry about it." And all day I was like, "I've said something really horrible to him. What have I said?" And then I was in the pub and he was whittering away, and I went, "I'm sorry. What is it they have to say to me?" He goes, "I'm saying it." I'm like, "Oh, it's not about me." And then I felt like a complete arsehole. I see in my head,
it's not about me.
Oh, it's not about me.
And in that case, it's not important then, really, is it?
I zoned out after that. No, but it is. It's so weird, but it's like, don't think of a black cat, and you go, well, fuck, I've thought of a black cat and all that sort of thing. So yeah,
exactly. Oh, incidentally, I was reading something very recently about, and I forget the phrase now, but it is the concept where if you say black cat, you think black cat in your head, and some people don't have a picture of one. So for instance, if I close my eyes, I can think of a black cat and it stood there in front of me. Mm-hmm. But some people have no visual thoughts at all, which I find fascinating.
I don't know. Yeah, because I think, but then I wondered to myself, do I have this? Because I definitely can visualize certain things, but then I think people have obviously various degrees of like visualizing stuff, like they can do it. I'm much better at describing things, but I guess even when I describe things, I can't visualize the whole image fully unless I like have to draw it out or something like that.
I do that sort of dictionary definition thing where it's like, think of a red apple, and I can see roughly the apple, not in huge detail, but I know it's red. I know the rough shape. I know where the stalk should be. Like It's like all the mathematical things of what an apple is. Mm-hmm. It's weird. I read that recently. Speaking of reading, I read something else very recently which was equally, if not more interesting, and I'd love it if you could explain what that was to me. So, Thea, what are we reading today?
So, Ryan, we are going back into Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, which has been a little while since we've sort of done a bigger sort of delve into sort of the history and lore of the Forgotten Realms. And, we talk a lot about wars. We talk a lot about great races that are fighting each other or have great histories. I wanted to look at not the little people per se, both physically and metaphorically, but those people who aren't touched by war, or people who have these communities that's very odd to see them as adventurers or out, because why would they leave? And interestingly, I didn't realize, and again, maybe it's just me as a GM, that there was a real big difference between these two particular communities. So today we're going to look at Halflings and Gnomes. So that's page 99, and it's about 15 pages or so. And we're going to look at them sort of like what makes them sort of unique in terms of their races, and a little bit of the history as well. And probably some pronunciations or mispronunciations of some gods that are associated with each of them. Oh yeah,
you've got a bunch to think about here, and they are all very, very interesting. But what a topic choice. We've been through quite a few of the chapters in this book, actually, and they do all involve normally horrendously old blood wars or mind flayer induced paranoia that sort of, people get hunted and now are crazy. And I mean, all kinds of terrifying backstories. And Halflings and Gnomes don't really have terrifying backstories, do they? They're very much an exception to how things normally are in the world.
Exactly that. And I'll say at the top, because I think sometimes when I'm all, are they not very similar in terms of things? It's actually quite interesting, the difference between them. So halflings, which are essentially, I don't know which one came first. I presume the hobbits came first. So this idea of Tolkien, sort of like small people who are good with their life. They like what they've got. They're not wanting for more. They have their own little communities and happy in these communities and stuff. And if they leave their communities, it's because something has happened that what makes them want to go. And so that's quite interesting in that respect. Whereas gnomes, on the other hand, they are always curious and there's never a dull moment in their life. So they're always wanting to see the world. They're always wanting to go out there. So it's very different, that sort of thing. So one is happy with their set and the other person wants more of their set, or wants to find out more about the world to see what else there is.
It's slightly different takes on a very similar theme, but they lead to some huge changes in how they go about and how they sort of display themselves. And yeah, I love it. I both have a special place in my heart in terms of how you would play a character. It's very much the anti-edgelord trope that you can sort of fight against in order to play one of these characters. Should we start with halflings? That's probably the best place to start.
Let's start with halflings. And interestingly enough, before we get into it, I think apart from humans, the only other races I've played are halflings and gnomes, like regularly in campaigns.
There you go.
There you go.
There you go. There's clearly a good person hidden in you that's just excited to be buried in a small hole, enjoying life.
Halflings are peaceful folk who have found niches for themselves away from these battles and the rivalries of bigger things. Same with gnomes as well, I should say. But there's this sort of, not myth, but this sort of idea of the look of the halflings, that whatever happens to them, maybe they're on the way to market and they fall, or there's some sort of danger that is posed to threat to them, they always manage to just sidestep it. It's like almost like an unseen force sort of intervenes with it. And as a result, there's this sort of belief system that they believe in this power of luck. And as a result, they abide by a number of great superstitions, which you should follow. And there's that sort of great belief system that, you've got to, count your stars, or you've got to, when you see a magpie, you got to, oh, good morning, Mr. Magpie, all these sort of things, so that good luck will always follow you. And ultimately what defines them, apart from sort of this sort of unnatural, uncanny as a look that we'll go into a bit more in a second, is that they just enjoy the simple pleasures of the moment. And they desire no more than that. They are perfectly happy with what has got. It's a bit like the satyrs we talked about a couple of episodes ago. But I think compared to the satyrs, who are always like, they're willing to have the revelry, they're willing to have the big parties and stuff, these halflings are like, we'll have the party, but we'll clean up. And we're happy with that. And everyone takes a part and everyone's happy and everything's great. Organized fun is organized. That's what the vibe I get from them.
Yeah, I love that. I love that being the biggest difference between a satyr and a halfling, is a halfling cleans up afterwards. That is so totally true. There is that sense of home, isn't there? Of hospitality and being the most amazing host. And enjoying having guests, and guests appreciating hosts and treating a home like it's their own home. And it's very orderly and quaint, isn't it, in the way they go about things. But they're happy with that, as long as you are in the moment and living life at home in a very nice way. They seem to be, that's a good lot for them.
Yeah, and the hospitality is actually a really good marker of this as well. So they are friendly to a fault. And one thing I really like about halflings is that they're not necessarily, they don't feel fear. And what I mean by that is that when they see like a stranger that comes into their community, they're not instantly hiding away, as one may think, like, oh, we must protect ourselves. They're probably like, oh, good morning. How are you this fine day? Like, they're willing to go and say hello. And ultimately, it's what counts is that the character behind that person. So like if there's ill intent, the halflings will be aware of it. It's not extended to naivety per se, but they're willing to be like, oh, hello, you're different. You're do you want to come in? Hello, that sort of giving that extension of hospitality, because they believe that most people probably have some good intentions somewhere, which again, we've talked about this before with other things, but I just like that idea that you're not afraid, or you're not questioning someone's motives straight away, which I guess D&D, again, that sort of idea is like, well, war is happening, so they've got a secret agenda, they're trying to one-up us. I think the way that halflings are, they're sort of almost disarmingly nice when you're like, oh, yes, I'd like some tea. And then there's that sort of weird thing where you're sort of like, a bit awkward about it because they're just so nice, but they're not. But like I said, they're not naive about it. They do have that instinct for self-preservation. So they can, I guess it's almost like seeing through someone, like your old granny sort of Lydia per se, that sort of sits back and it's like, so tell me all about yourself. And if you lie, Granny Lydia knows. I think it's the same with all halflings. They know when something's up and can see through any lies and stuff, which I thought, I love that.
Exactly, that deep-seated insight. But as I said, I think the book describes it as having almost optimism running through everything they do. It's that optimistic sense of anything that's happening. You know, someone comes up to the gate charging up in armor, whereas somebody would go, oh my goodness, close the gates, we'll quiz this person as they come in. The halfling would go, oh, they clearly need help, let them in as a default. And they're not, I think it's worth saying they're not naive. Halflings don't go so far as to be stupid or throwing themselves into danger based on a naivety, but certainly optimistic to a fault. If there is a good way of seeing something that isn't necessarily dangerous to them, they will see it like that. They see the hope, they see the redemption, they see just the idea of a good story afterwards. Like even in the moment of something being really, really, really bad, it's like, well, just think about what I can, how many people would love to hear about this afterwards.
Yeah, and that is actually a really good point as well. Again, I think everyone will just imagine the beginning of like Lord of the Rings with the Hobbit tea party and like Gandalf coming in and Bilbo and Frodo giving tea and stuff. It's that sort of homely quality that you're getting through. But a very good point, what you just said about stories. So one of the big sort of like, I guess, unique things about sort of halflings in general is that they love a good story, and their prized possessions are, things that are valuable, but not of monetary value, but it's something to do with a good story. So again, that idea, you've been to aunt's and uncle's house or great grandma's house where there are just tons of what you think is tat, lining the walls and stuff, but that person has a story behind every single piece of item. And to them, that story is beautiful and interesting. And it could be just everyday things. It doesn't have to be amazing quest things. You don't have to have like the sword of Avalon behind you on the mantelpiece. It could literally be a pipe. It could be a key from some like a ring of keys from a jail or something, which your auntie got out of. Like there's a great example of Auntie Hattie chasing away a bugbear with a rolling pin. And I thought, of course you'd keep the rolling pin. That was a really cool idea. But as a result, it sort of goes back on them. So when other people come, so strangers come into the communities, and the hobbits, not the hobbits, gotta switch back that. The halflings see that they are covered in, amazing items and stuff. They will probably ask a lot of maybe what we'd see as invasive or probing questions. So where did you get this? Tell us that, because they are interested in the stories of it. And I think once you're over that sort of maybe evasive probing, again, I think of like grandmother's way of questioning you, trying to get those bits of information out. It's not, again, necessarily for ill intent. It's very unlikely that. It's more that they love a good story. And the other side to it is that they love keeping history alive. So they have almost like a gift for storytelling. And it is a rare treat for any outsiders to come into the community to have basically, I assume it's like a town hall meeting where people celebrate or have the party and stuff, and you have the elders of the community giving out these amazing stories. And I love the idea, it actually does say that quite a lot of the stories are song-like and almost rhyming. So it's almost like a performance piece that people listen to. So it's always any tales about caution that they have, like we must be careful of, to be invaded by orcs or be invaded by stuff from the forest, we must learn these things, and do it in almost like a fairy tale way. It's like I'm just trying to think, not revolting rhymes for revolting children, that's a Roald Dahl,
but that histories sort of thing.
Yeah, horrible histories and stuff. That idea of just putting it in that kind of garb so that everyone listens to it because they enjoy the story, but they keep the message on. It's there's so many books.
The story is more interesting if it's a story than just a warning. Yeah, I do like that. At no point will a halfling sit down and go, you shouldn't go into that cave because you'll die. Yes. It'll be some sort of, as I say, like a 17-page rhyme about how Ginny Jitters went into the cave and got the jitters because of what they saw in it and stuff like that. And I do love. It's the idea. I mean, halflings have this sort of weird juxtaposition, don't they? They love stories, they love history, but then they also don't seem to want to travel around too much, in the sense that they're very happy with where they are. They're very happy with being in their small little worlds, small, very safe, very calm little places that they can just sort of inhabit.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, I guess, because I guess they're so interested with news from the outside. I imagine it is when your parents ask you about what you've been doing, and if you list them all off, they go, well, that's lovely. And they're happy that you have done that. They've enjoyed almost like, I guess, almost parasitically feeding off your enjoyment of telling the story, and that's enough for them. They don't need to go see it themselves because it sounds too much of a bother. I like the idea that anything beyond the community is a bother for them. But yeah, it's interesting again that you said that. So they are adapt. They're not like reclusive by nature. They just have places to settle which are just out of the way, almost like forgotten about. They could be literally next door to you, but just the way they've built their communities and stuff, you just don't happen to see them or don't know they exist. The other thing I quite liked is that they don't produce goods or trade goods for outsiders, but they love to trade with visitors who have anything interesting to swap. So again, and we've always been to those sort of those big urban towns and stuff where we always go and we all have monetary value and stuff, but that doesn't mean anything to them. So you could go into a halfling village or a community and what they have stuff and you're like, oh, that's really good, but then you need to bargain your way with your own stories and your own thing. And I just thought that would be interesting to see that as a role-playing perspective for players, to be actually like, okay, convince me this is a good story. Why would you part with a spoon that you just pulled out of your bag,
Yeah, exactly. It's a good opportunity to bring in a bit of role play to people who necessarily wouldn't be jumping in that direction initially. It's like, right, they will take your 10 gold, but you probably get away with giving that spoon as long as you can convince them. And I love that as an idea. Like, you are absolutely right. It's just a nice way of looking at things and a nice way of just going through life and halfling. This thing about it is idyllic, isn't it? Halfling places to live would just be wonderful, and all of the drawings you ever see in books are all of these golden, green and yellow fields with nice bright blue skies and moss and trees, and it always seems just beautiful. The artwork is, there's a bloke skipping a fish, which I just find really, really funny in the book, but he just looks absolutely ecstatic with himself.
So then going from that to why they might leave, which I thought was an interesting thing. So yeah, for them, what would be the purpose of an adventure? What would draw them to it? And they talk about, they are unlikely characters for doing it. And sometimes they are forced to leave for various reasons. Maybe they need to resettle their community for whatever reason. Like I said, they're not targets of wars or anything like that, these communities, but they are roving bands of, I was going to say merchants, mercenaries, people living in the forest that might just take what they want and stuff like that. So maybe they have to suddenly up and go and maybe go to a city instead. And they talked us this idea about a halfling quarter in every city and them going there and started building up this very homely home from home, and everyone is welcome and stuff. I just love that as an idea. Like, every city has that sort of quarter. But the adventurers themselves, they are those sort of halflings. Adventurers are people who are born with an overabundance of curiosity. There's a call to adventure, and even if the call to adventure is just to go to the big city over the big hill, there's this, I love this, it's a phenomenon called fancy feet, where this community say, oh, Marjorie, well, she's got fancy feet, that one. Oh, hopefully it'll come out of her. And the idea of fancy feet is that that urge to wander beyond the boundaries of this community, to go places beyond that. And what I really loved is that there are different ways to deal with it. Some people will be like gently sort of go, well, maybe you should reconsider, you've got a great place here, etc. Alternatively, there could be a big celebration, like, fantastic, off you go. We will celebrate your sort of coming of age, I guess. Off you go. It reminded me very much of in Moana. That idea is that
yes.
she is, wants to explore and stuff, but her place is with her community, and her parents are sort of like, well, you are the next leader. We need you here, but everything here is what we want. So I really took that sort of thing where she wants to go and explore and see what is beyond. And even when she does, she comes back and all of her experiences are better for the community, but she does stay with the community after all.
Exactly. And I guess the only difference between the Moana and the halfling, as I look at it, is that with Moana, obviously they're like, you don't leave because you've got all of these things. Halflings sometimes are quite keen to let their children display those sort of fancy feet-esque things, either on the understanding that they grow out of it eventually, or actually sometimes you do need a couple of adventurers to go out and find the world and bring things back. And they're not necessarily, as you say, like, halflings have this sort of weird mix of being very isolated and very reclusive, but they're not reclusive to a fault. It's just that they keep out the way of people. They're very willing to engage in society and life. And to, as I say, it talks about homes away from home and how halflings will, even if they're not in halfling establishments or towns, there will be a halfling quarter or a halfling neighborhood in most cities and towns that you have got. They find their ways. They are fantastic hosts. We've spoken about Eberron before, where it talks about halflings being the absolute purveyors of basically every decent tavern and inn in a world, because it's just something that comes naturally to them. And in Eberron, there's dragon marks that sort of come with that as well, that make it a little bit more involved. But that same idea that seeing a halfling owning the tavern in a human city would not be a strange thing. That would be like absolutely the perfect halfling thing. People coming through, telling stories without them needing to actually go anywhere. Yeah. They want exposure, but they don't necessarily want to be in the firing line.
But speaking of Eberron, there is obviously other settings which halflings are in, and one it mentions in the book, which I had to look up because I've not really heard of the setting, the Dark Sun setting, which it sounds a lot like Mad Max in the Forgotten Realms. There's been a post-apocalyptic something, and obviously all these races have been affected in some way, and it talks about halflings turning from these beautiful, homely creatures into, and I'll quote this, feral creatures prone to devouring flesh of humans and elves. And you're just like, okay, in case that wasn't for you, in case you were like, oh, well, I want them to be different, there are different versions of halflings in other settings. But I just love that idea that you go from one thing, like, oh, it's so homely, to like, today is a good day to die, that sort of Mad Max feel.
The idea of a rabid, cannibalistic halfling is terrifying. Something about that being too good a creature. I just don't want to see that happen. That's that's awful. That's awful. But it's all about stories, and that's the thing to remember with halflings. They want to create legends. They want to be legends, and then they want to, more importantly, tell everybody about the spoon that they've stolen from the giant and become a telling legend themselves when they come back. I don't know. I like them. I really like them. They've always sort of resonated nicely with me, halflings, and how they go about things.
Yeah, and just to sort of finish off before we look into sort of the ideals that you can get, because there's a couple of tables. D&D always has some good tables about ideals, characteristics, that sort of thing. I'm going to quickly mention the halfling gods. So I didn't realize this at all, but obviously every lineage, every sort of race will have gods of some sort that they adhere to. And interesting for this group of gods, halflings don't see them as deities or something that should be worshipped, more like extended family members, that they are part of the team. Again, going with that homely thing. And again, they set an example, which is told through stories. Again, that sort of like warning not to go into the wood, but dressed up in sort of more poetic language. All the gods, I noticed, they're either good, neutral, or lawful. There's no evil gods at all in the halfling pantheon. The most important one is Yolanda, or Yolanda. Oh God, I don't know. It's the main one at the top. Yondala. There you go.
It's weird, isn't it? Yeah, very strange spelling.
Yeah, Yondala, who is as a strong leader, and there was a big story about how she was the one that initially sort of helped the halflings go into this way of having this luck, being able to sidestep things and protect them. And she had this vision of how her people would be and stuff, and showed them how to build and to plant and to harvest and how to protect these communities. So she is sort of at the head of the sort of pantheon. And then you have other ones, and there's a good mix of both male and female presenting gods. You've got ones that are about clever tactics in battles, which again, the chapter talks about tactics used in the community, which again, I thought was quite interesting. Again, would you necessarily put that into a campaign? I think you would, if you were basing certain villages and stuff, that they have certain ways of dealing with outside forces or outside ways to contend with, not necessarily huge armies per se, but like a random ogre coming into town. Like, how do you deal with that? And yeah, it's just all sort of things are very interesting, and there's different gods about adventuring and stuff. So the whole sort of like range of the sort of aspects of the halfling lifestyle is covered, I say. So yeah, I'm very interested to read about that.
Very much so. They're much more detailed and interesting folks than you may put into sort of initial thoughts. And the idea, I just like the idea that halflings can have gods of war, and it's less sort of military and more just sort of like trickery and winning against the odds. And I just love the idea of some of these, like the troll knocker, the idea that they sort of just use some halflings to act as bait to lure a troll in and then attack it like that. It's just, I love it. I love it. It's absolutely great. That's halflings and lots of interesting things about halflings. So how would you compare them initially to gnomes? Because I think a lot of people would probably get the two, not mixed up, but certainly would mix characteristics up between the two. In some cases, maybe fairly, but in others, maybe not.
No, absolutely. And I certainly was one right at the beginning who just thought the same things. But gnomes, compared to halflings, they are lovers of discovery. That is what drives a gnome, that there's always something, they've always got questions, they've always got things they want to do, and they get obsessed with certain topics. Well, if I thought to myself, like, if I was in real life one of these things, I think I'd definitely be a gnome over a halfling. So I've always got questions. I always fiddle with things and like learn how things are made and done. And they talk about drinking deeply of life, so they're rarely bored and they savor every moment. Whereas compared to halflings, they make an art out of idleness. You know, they'll have their perfect spot where they can just while away the afternoon. For gnomes, they will be doing stuff. They'll be like, okay, I've read my book, I've done this, and I've made this. You know, in a whole course of an afternoon. So that's how I would compare to them. And it doesn't mean in terms of productivity. Both are very happy doing what they are doing, but it's very, you can easily tell the difference because gnomes are just fascinated by things and they are fueled by this irrepressible sort of curiosity, and it's never dull when you're around a gnome, which I love.
Exactly. And that's the thing, it's never being content to sit and do nothing. Like, everything can be improved, everything can be sort of filled in with more excitement and joy and randomness, and it's so different to halflings. You're absolutely right. If both had an afternoon off, a halfling may sit there with a pipe and a pint and just watch the sunset, whereas the gnome will have invented a pint glass that sings, a pipe that refills itself, and then before they knew it was 2 days later and the afternoon had long gone and they realized they're late for something else. So it's absolutely, that's exactly the sort of like the idea between the two of them. But even within gnomes, I mean, we have this idea of gnomes all being tinkerers and clockmakers, but even that's not entirely true because we've got different types of gnomes, haven't we?
Yes, and interestingly, compared to halflings, obviously there are stout halflings and lightfoot halflings. There's not too much a difference between those two, whereas we actually have 3 different types of gnome, which are very distinct. So obviously the one you just mentioned, so the idea of tinker gnomes are, more commonly they are rock gnomes. So this idea that when you're in sort of a cavern and there are rock gnomes around, there is the sounds of industry, the tapping, it's a constant hum of stuff, and the jabbering of near intelligent speed. So the idea that they're wittering along almost at the speed of thought, talking out loud. I've mentioned it before. There's a program called She-Ra, Princesses of Power, and there's an entraptor who's a engineering princess who does exactly that. She just talks to herself and thinks these things out loud. And I use her for a big inspiration for when I play gnomes, because just the way she talks about stuff and people go, what is it that you need? And you go, yes, it's this. And it's great to see how long you could whittle on for about until someone interrupts you. People are getting better at doing it, because I lose what I'm saying about maybe 2 sentences and I'll just keep going until someone goes, oh, she needs editing. Right, now I'll talk to her. But what I love about rock gnomes is this idea that they are always busy. They're always doing stuff, these sort of bold periods of experimentation, but they have mutual respect for what other people are doing despite different perspectives. So you could be building some big digging machine to help win the mines, and someone else is doing something similar. You might be a bit jealous of it, perhaps. You might be like, not so sure. But at the same time, you're like, got to respect what they're doing. They've also thought of a different way to come at a problem. And that's something I miss in real life, is that some people are like, no, don't like it, hate it. You get judgmental and stuff like that. In game, there is this sort of collaborative thing where you're like, I don't agree with you, but I respect what you're doing. And I just like that as a thing. And this idea of failing forward, so that you could break this machine 10 times, but it takes the 11th time to work, and you learn from it. And they love that. They love being able to create things, take notes on it. The idea that you interact with them and they go, try this out. And they're just there with a notepad going, no. And then it's like, cool, thank you. And then move back. And that's maybe a downside, perhaps, is that they get quite a tunnel vision. So they could spend hours in their workshops creating something. But like you said, days could pass by. People could be like, where are you? You need to go. And I'm just finishing this one tiny thing, And speaking of different settings, in Dragonlance, they talk about gnomes there, where it's essentially they are always working on creations. But their creations, compared to this, where it's like, oh, it's a mutual goal, we're trying to better things, it's definitely for gnomes in Dragonlance, they are more like mad scientists. So they create things and they're like, it will always fail, but the effects go from ridiculous to dangerous, which I love that idea. Go try it. And you're like, oh God, no, I don't want to. No, I don't want to.
It's the idea that, and this is what I quite like, because I think it's a good life lesson anyway, but there's no such thing as a bad failure. Every failure will improve the chances of something succeeding next time. The idea that if you're trying to do something really, really hard and there's 500 things that can go wrong, if you do 500 experiments, the 501st will guaranteed be a success because you've ironed out every single thing that could go wrong by that point. And you're right. It's that idea that they just bordering on dangerous at times, but they don't mind mucking up. They don't mind failing because they actually, each disappointment just cuts off a dead end that they don't want to do anymore. And they just keep going and keep going and keep going.
And then going from rock gnomes, we go then to forest gnomes, and these obviously are gnomes that live in forests or big green lush areas. And what I liked about that is that they learn from their surroundings, so similar to rock gnomes in a way, but they create these lovely gardens, these organic sculptures and beautiful emerald jewelry. They're really big into their green. And again, very similar to halflings in a way. They can make their homes sort of vanish into the landscape and live in sort of warrens dug into the hillsides. But what I love, they are amazing interior designers. So there's an example they use of like taking advantage of the natural features. So imagine you had like a pond above your hole, so to speak, and they that you would dig and put a fishbowl there and have a skylight with an aquarium going in it. And I was just like, that's amazing. You have, smallish but comfortable homes that are beautifully decorated and stuff, and having stuff like that, which again you don't necessarily see in humans or elves' homes. Everything's very different. So that idea that they are still creative but using the natural landscape in some way, compared to rock gnomes, which look into obviously stonework and gems and whatnot. The other thing, there was a little note. So in Mordenkaisen's, I think we talked about this before, there is, in certain books, in certain source books, there is like a voice that goes throughout, a few notes here and there. I know Tasha's has it as well, and Volo's certainly. In this one, there's just a little note that said, oh, forest gnomes or gnomes in general make great librarians and curators. And I love that idea that compared to maybe halflings who like, this is a good story, but it's maybe you can't make the connections, like, oh, why have you got a spoon and a horseshoe? The gnomes will be like, set it up beautifully as an exhibit, and it will explain why. It sort of tells you the story as it goes through. So that's what I thought was quite cool on that. On that front.
Exactly. The thing that image you described there, the fish bowl skylight sort of thing that the forest gnome might have. Weirdly enough, my first thought was somebody would be sat at the dinner table with the fish bowl above them, lighting up the dinner table, and somebody swims above them, and they're like, "Oh, don't look up! Don't look up! They don't know we're here."
It's like that. There was a thing in the news recently about the invisible pool between two buildings, which obviously got a lot of controversy. But I was like, that must be awful, because you're looking down, going, "There's a massive gap," but also people looking up, going, don't see it. Oh no, you got rid of the shorts.
Absolutely. So the main difference between forest gnomes then, apart from living in forests and rock gnomes, which tend to be more sort of burrows and undergrounds and things, forests live in burrows as well, but it's a difference in surroundings. But it's all about what they do to experiment with, isn't it? Because rock gnomes are tinkerers and alchemists and artificers, but forest gnomes are more pure magic, aren't they? Illusion and sort of animal husbandry.
Yeah, absolutely. They are experts in illusion. And again, a great line from this was that they will use illusion magic for practically any reason, even if that reason is simply artistic. So again, there's this big sort of convention where they are telling stories to people, but instead of it using the reliance on words, I like the idea, like if you compare it again back to halflings, that halflings do it without the presentation slides. They just do it off the cuff, like a TED talk, whereas forest gnomes talk, but also have the PowerPoint slides with lots of animations and transitions and there's a YouTube video, all that sort of thing. So they'll use the magic to enhance the thing, but hopefully they don't do it too much, but it just adds to the aesthetic.
Imagine, so it's similar to if you were giving a talk and you had somebody signing on the edge in sort of sign language, but instead of doing that, they were having to create illusions as you were talking. I mean, could you imagine the chaos of it? It's just like, they're talking about a dragon. Oh, no, small dragon.
Small dragon, big dragon.
Blue, red, definitely red.
Red. That would be amazing. Oh, I love that idea. Just, that to someone that is the sign language person, but also the visual artist as well, where you're having to create on the, you have like, oh God, what next? Blah, because obviously when you see them, people signing and stuff, you get their voice or you get their sort of characteristics. There's definitely stuff when you've seen on, or more recently on the government announcements and stuff, where they're doing stuff and you think, oh, they hate the politician that's speaking just now. It's the way they're sort of acting with their face, like
yeah, exactly. The illusions that you get are not going to be of a good quality. So your story better be short and good.
Yeah, exactly. And then finally, we have our third gnomes, which isn't talked about in the player's handbook at all. And I think here they do have stats for it, but I think they do have stats in the DM's guide as well. But deep gnomes, or Swifnurblin, as I believe is the pronunciation, they're sort of called a forgotten folk in a sense. They are gnomes that definitely live in underground, in the deepest sort of darkest reaches of the Underdark. And maybe compared to the other gnomes, so like obviously there's this spark of curiosity and stuff, they are more practical, maybe unfairly, I think, seen as the grumpy cousins of the gnomish clan. But essentially, if you've lived your whole life in the Underdark and you're fighting just to survive, I think it's okay to be a little bit grumpy when some people tell you to lighten up, per se.
Yeah, exactly. We live underground. There is no light. What are you talking about?
Exactly. Yeah. So I feel that they're very pragmatic and very sort of straightforward, serious, I think, which is no bad thing. And what I loved about them, because obviously all these things are talking about their homes per se, their homes are hidden, as understandably, but they're also still homely, but functional. So they have obviously these labyrinth-like tunnels and traps and guards to stop, the Underdark from encroaching on their settlements. So as a result, the settlement may seem very uninviting, but there's a beauty in sort of the natural stone shaping of their home. So you'll go in and everything is obviously shaped out of the stone. So it's open, maybe open plan a little bit, but it's practical. There is a beauty in it. It's like when you see sort of naturally formed caves that happen to have like stalagmites and stalactites, that sort of thing. I just like that as an idea. But as a result, so they are constantly community minded. So they are thinking about like, oh, what's best for the community? Because obviously we need to protect ourselves from things that are coming in. But they have very little concern about privacy. So I like the idea, because they need to know where everyone is at any one point. So they're like, come in, and you're in your bedroom, which is also the bathroom, which is also the kitchen. And it's like, come on, we need to go. And you're like, I'm not dressed. You're like, doesn't matter. We don't care. Don't care.
Nope. Does not care. I love that. Just the idea of actually living somewhere like that would be hilarious when you actually think about it. I was looking around flats in London once, and there was one that we looked at that had no doors internally, and it was just, that's an existence I was not ready for at the time. And well,
before I moved to this place, there was a flat upstairs which had a door to one of the rooms, but it was a rolling door, like a whole rolling section. So it wasn't even a proper wall. You just have to roll the whole door across.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It would have been. But also, could you imagine you're at a party, you're like, right, well, time to go.
Oh no.
Exactly.
Yeah, that would not be a very good divide, would it? That was absolutely awful. But I think, sorry, going back to Snufnublin, or however you pronounce it, that the thing to take away from these guys is that they're not evil. They may be grouchy and slightly moody because of their circumstance, but they are still good. It's not like a Durgar to dwarf situation where Durgar are definitely evil. These deep gnomes are just distant and put upon.
Yes, they're definitely, I would say, like a private person. They, compared to say like the halflings, as who are always very welcoming and believe stuff, they're always definitely more cautious, and they take that moment to be like, assess the situation and then eventually warm up to you. I imagine them a little bit like we talked about Minotaurs recently, the idea that they are maybe standoffish a little bit, but ultimately they do warm to you, and they probably have a good laugh and stuff like that, but they, at the forefront of their mind all the time is any sort of, not conflict, but anything that could happen to their settlement, because obviously it would be really bad. The Underdark is not a nice place to live. So,
No, very rewarding though. Very rewarding in terms of lots of gems and metals and things for them to mine and use, but still, absolutely.
Exactly. And just to finish off, really, so obviously gnomes have gods as well. And it's very interesting. Here it talks about, obviously, there's an incredible number of legends about their deities, and each legend is true in its own way. So I love the idea that
its own way. I love that. That's such a news thing to say, isn't it?
So, isn't it? It's like you don't get one version of it. There's so many different versions from these different communities. All these stories change, so we don't know if there is just 7 of them, if there's 11 of them, if they're all female, if they're all male. It's all, all the different communities will have different version of it, and each of them are true. But the main thing to note is that the head of the pantheon, so to speak, is someone called, and I love this name, Garl Glittergold. GGG, essentially, in my head. And they are the person that sort of brings the others together to go off onto adventures or to pull together because of community. They are described as a gold-skinned gnome, a prankster, a joker, and a good laugh will serve you better than a grim attitude, which I love. Like that idea is that everything is okay in the end. We've just got to, laugh our way through it, or we've got to make our way through it. And all the other sort of, I won't pronounce all their names because we'll be here forever, but stuff like the Wild Wanderer, so the god of the forests, but also has a big raccoon to explore with them. You're like, okay, I'll take that. Yeah,
of course. They can't help but being cute, can they? It's just like, it's not like a huge rat. It's like, oh, a little raccoon. Oh, lovely.
And interesting with that one as well. So obviously Wild Wanderer is sort of not a god of tricking per se, but they just happen to be, I imagine it as like an odd couple type thing where the raccoon constantly gets you into trouble and this person has to get your way out of it. I think there's all those stories about blaming that, but I love the idea that it's actually both ways and you're just blaming the raccoon for all of your problems per se. But there are other ones as well. There's Cloak Shadow, which teaches the folks to hide and to use magic to deceive foes. Smooth Hands, which is the patron of deep gnomes, who is a drive to know more and the power to control earth elementals, which I thought was pretty good. Then this one, I would say Flandel Steelskin, who is just described as someone who has a big nose that can smell ore and is the god of metal crafting. I mean, if that's your defining feature, it feels a bit sad in a way. But again, it's just the way that these stories are sort of told. Exactly.
At least you know what you're good at and you enjoy it. I can sniff out. I mean, imagine that as an actual skill. You could sniff out gold. I mean, what a skill that would be.
Yeah, all of these different gods obviously had their different bits, and they squabble a bit like what before when we talked about mythic odysseys of Theros. All these different pantheons, they'll squabble to a lesser extent. Most of them are good or lawful or chaotic, but only one is chaotic evil. I'm going to say this name wrong, absolutely, Erdel. And it's this big story that Gar Glittergold tried to get all the gods together to work on some big quest. And Erdlen was like, no, I'm not interested, and followed his own selfish ways. And as a result, the quest succeeded, but at a cost. And whether that's because one of the other gods lost their hand, the steel skin cannot have the skin anymore. And as a result, this person, Erdel, was exiled from the Seven Golden Hills, which is where this pantheon is. It's that sort of idea that greed and destruction is a great thing, and we should be warned against it. And now that Erdel is now a big sort of, they've described it as a destructive monster, a great blind and hairless mole with iron claws and teeth. And at any time you as a gnome experience jealousy, greed, or envy, that comes from Erlen. And so there's a big importance, like, hey, society is important. You need to work together in order to come over a problem, which I just thought, oh, great.
It is cool. I wish that our children were taught about the needs to avoid greed and petulance by a huge blind mole with steel teeth and I mean, that would definitely get the message across, I think, much more. But I love the idea that even with the bad things, gnomes can't help to be cute. Their villain is a mole.
Yep.
I mean, I've seen moles. I grew up in the countryside. They're really cute. They're really, really cute. Even a scary mole. I mean, everything about the gnomes are cute. I mean, I was just reading the next bit talks about the Golden Hills, which is the gnomes' sort of utopia on the plane of Bitopia, I believe, or Bitopia.
Yeah, which we've spoken about before.
Yeah, one of the positive planes. Very, very cool place. But it's just this huge warren that looks really, really idyllic. And again, the note in the book just says it would be the most relaxing place in the multiverse if it weren't for the fact that each hill was as busy as a beehive on the inside. And that's exactly the sort of thing. It looks beautiful from the outside, and inside is just a warren of chaos and construction. And I just love the idea that, the gods, they are just this sort of group of friends that still live in the hills and actually exist. Like, I love that as a concept.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it as like a friends reunion type thing. Absolutely, definitely. Oh, I see that. And yeah, just to quickly finish off, gnome adventurers, the reason that they may leave home is always because they are curious. They want to know more. So it's more likely that they'll go up on adventures. This is where I can't remember. I think gnomes are in the basic rules over halflings as a result, but I can't remember. It's one or the other. One of them's in, one of them's not. But this idea that they are fascinated by this pull of the cosmos, that there is like this giant sheen of complexity that you are only a small part of, but you have a part to play, which I love. And some communities, some gnome communities, do make a practice of sending young adults away as a sort of rite of passage, but ask them if they come back to bring new information or ideas for the community. So the idea is that you're going on your gap year, absolutely, but when you come back, please, help us evolve us. So compared to like the halfling community, say, well, you go out there and then once you've had your fill, you'll always have a home here. Here it's like, we're not kicking you out, but if you come back with more stuff, that's great. We love that.
Yeah, exactly. We're not kicking you out, but please, go be useful. Thank you.
Exactly. And yeah, just to finally finish off, both halflings and gnomes have traits. So in case you're very bored and trying to come up with character backstories or anything like that, there's some really good tables on this. Like I will say though, on the gnome one, that in terms of flaws, there's only 4 flaws that you can have, which I thought was interesting. I guess there's only so much you can do, which is not blowing stuff up or getting your curiosity kills the cat, so to speak. But in terms of the halfling one, I think the one I picked out, which was sort of my favorite, she says, trying to find it, is one of the ideals, which is companionship. You're pretty sure you can be friends with anyone and anything. I thought, what a great role-playing thing that would be. Like, you're not, again, that idea that halflings aren't afraid of anything inherently, but just like they go, they just need a good friend.
Yep.
1 second, and you're like, no.
Exactly. No, it's wonderful, isn't it? Like, I love that as a concept. It's really, really lovely. Mm-hmm. Just some of I love some of the gnome personality traits as well. Just looking at them, you love little and big critters and go out of your way to help them. And big critters being the thing, you could easily see a gnome running up to some horrifying dinosaur and being like, "Oh, you're so cute.
You're like,
would you have this carrot?" Yeah, exactly. No, it wants your arm, but sure.
Again, have a look through, and also in case you're interested, there are the deep known stats as well. So you get stuff like they're normally neutral alignments for this, but again, as we know, alignments mean nothing anymore, so that's good. But they've got stuff like superior dark vision, stone camouflage, where you get advantages on stealth checks against stone because obviously you're used to it, and you get something called feat called Snurfnurblin magic, which you can get non-detection. Yeah, non-detection, blindness and deafness, blur, and disguise self. Non-detection, as we've discovered, is a very useful spell that we definitely need to use more of. Turns out,
very low level spell as well. There we go. No, it's really, really very useful, and gnomes. I like them as an idea. As an adventuring character, you could really see just somebody that's full of life and wants to know more and wants to be curious and gets their nose into the wrong places, but generally is very helpful. Like, yeah. I've seen you play a gnome before, but you've mentioned you've played a halfling. Like, was there a difference between playing the two, or did you kind of just enjoy both?
So the halfling, I think I've sort of talked about it before, the halfling paladin called Susan was that was interesting. I think, knowing what I know now about halflings, I wouldn't have played them as a snooty know-it-all paladin as a result. I definitely played it paladin first before halfling. But I'd love to play a halfling again. Like, I mean, I will admit, mechanically speaking, for halflings, you get obviously luck or lucky. So if every time you roll a 1, you can just re-roll it and get the high, or see what else you get. But
amazingly useful, that.
Oh, I love that. That's why I would say most of my characters then, as a result, do take the luck feat, because I got so used to having halfling luck as a result. But yeah, I've always been a big fan of gnomes. I just like that idea that they are little scientists, and that positivity and willingness to fail forward. Even in my own life, I'm getting much better at just going, I'm just going to do it. Okay, it's failed, but I've learned something from it. But it's something that it takes so much getting used to, and having a whole race or a whole community that is just like that, and it must be so supportive. And so, like I said, there's no jealousy per se. The people respect you, what you're doing, and are willing to help you to do it. But also, they don't, say like, go out, explore, go do it, and pushing you to do more. That's, yeah, everything about that is like tick, 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 tick.
Exactly. I totally agree. I could see myself playing a halfling, actually. I like the idea.
I pegged you as a halfling person.
1000%. I love to chill and do nothing when I should be really productive.
We're so different.
I know. There you go. Maybe we offer the differences between the two, but we both get a lot of stuff done. But
we do.
Yeah.
In our own time and way.
in my own time and way. That's exactly it. Well, there we go. That was an amazing whistle-stop tour between the two, and I hope that you use one or both in a campaign. They're very, very interesting, and I just, the idea of getting any community of gnomes together just, I think, is absolutely insane. And I'd love to see a Bitopia adventure where you go over to see the world of the gnomes. I mean, that would be just the maddest thing. What can we find you doing in the meantime, though? What have you been up to?
So when I'm not just spouting like how much I love being a gnome, I run What Am I Rolling, which is a twice monthly RPG one-shot podcast. As always, it is doing very, very well.
Very, very well.
Lots of things happening. At some point, need to sort out Patreon and Discord, but those are problems for later me. I'm busy reading too much. That's the thing. But also, I forgot to mention it last time, but we have a discount code at Third Space Gaming. If you type in the offer code DMBC into their website, you get 10% off your first order on whatever you want. So whether it is RPG books, miniatures, wargaming terrain, who knows? The choice is yours. But yeah, DMBC for 10% off. But Ryan, really, what are you up to, man? What's going on?
Well, I'll be using that code. That sounds amazing. Apart from that, no, you can come find me on Discord as well. I do have a Discord, the UrsaRyan Discord. So come and say hello and talk to me about anything we've been speaking to about podcasts. I'd love to talk more D&D. It's a very good fun. So come find me on that.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all for listening, and never going to end this well. We'll speak to you next time.
I love that. That was great. I'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.